It was interesting talking about, and I was particularly looking at the different pillars that you were looking at. I wonder if you, and also Bruce, when you were talking about, a lot of the focus was on, the existing situation and how we change all of the stuff that we have, in terms of increasing efficiency of households and changing light bulbs and sort of things. I'm interested in what your thoughts are about not making the problem any worse. Because, I think when I look at building standards in this country and I compare them with where I'm from in Ireland, and we've gone a massive journey in a very, very short period of time to go and increase our standards, I can see what can be done in a very, very short period of time. I look, anytime I have conversations with, folk who are setting standards, they talk to me about the stakeholders and how hard it is and so on. And it just seems to me that if you're buying a new house or something like that, you're not getting what you paid for. You think you're buying a nice energy efficient house, and you're not. Because all of the policy stuff that's coming in on the evidence base is that whilst there might be not great laws at the moment, the actual how they're getting enforced and actually getting what you pay for isn't happening. And I'm really interested to hear what your thoughts are about how we can stop making things, any worse. The more buildings we build that are not of great quality, the more we have to go back and retrofit again and again. Do you have comments on anyone on that as well, but particularly where you see it doing climate works?
Thanks. There is a little bit of movement on both of those issues. The question was what's happening around compliance with building standards and what about improving building standards? A healthy crisis always triggers some action, and so in Melbourne, and particularly the Docklands fires, the towers, has meant that the compliance issue has rocketed up the agenda of the Australian Building Codes Board and the COAG Council that oversees that. I'm yet to see the results of that, but I do know it is front and centre now of that agenda, and other work has been pushed off in order that compliance gets sorted. So watch that space, but I think there's some movement now. There's Victoria, I know, is looking at how you can use apps to help the compliance be more real time, so that as buildings are being built, you can essentially use technology to demonstrate what you're doing and get it ticked off and approved essentially in real time. So that there should be some rapid movement there.
Just two things that I've seen that I think could make a really big difference to if you're building a house or an apartment and so on. If when the people have to hand the thing over, and they have to hand over your plumbing certificate and your electrical certificate, if they had to go and hand over a certificate that showed that the building had air tightness testing on, and they had to hand over thermal imaging to show that there was actually any insulation in the walls and that it wasn't draping down, that would have an ability to go and say to the market, start doing your job, because you're going to get caught out, because there's nothing but catting out people at the moment.
So I guess I'd suggest now's the time for you to make those suggestions known to the regulatory bodies, because they're listening. It's on their mandate. They've been given extra funding to deal with it, and so now's the time to demonstrate those products and those suggestions. Similarly, on the upgrade front, I talked about the NEP, the National Energy Productivity Plan, and it contains a national commitment to upgrade the building code at the next window. They're now every 3 years. My organisation pointed out that it's a 2010 standard at the moment on energy efficiency, and it's locked in until 2019. Disaster. When our research showed that in 2012, just 2 years after that standard was put in place, best practice buildings were already 50% better on energy and greenhouse. And yet they can be built at 2018 on the old 2010 standard. Government has heard that message. They've committed to the upgrade. We're working with the Building Codes Board on how to facilitate that, how much of an upgrade. Is it just commercial buildings first? Is residential ready? So there is a live discussion, and again, now's the time to get involved.
Yeah, okay, in terms of the commercial one, I think is 100% going to happen in 2019, or 90% that going to happen. In 2019, I think the residential, there's still some debate about whether that's going to happen or not. And I come back to what you're saying about the standards. I mean, it would be nice to have air tightness standards, but frankly, even basic standards aren't being enforced. I mean, one of my friends recently got a house made and you know, didn't even, you know, the builder was like, oh, you don't need these forms, do you really? And because they're actually in the sector, they pushed really hard to get that stuff done. But the amount of corner cutting I find just extraordinary in our building regulatory system. I mean, just basic questions of people enforcing decisions who actually have a very strong vested interest in actually having a repeat customer from the builder. So why the builder should be ever involved in who's doing the compliance is astonishing to me, and yet that commonly happens. Yeah.
Well, I guess I'll use the Dan question, but I used to work as energy efficiency consultant. Now I'm more in the general space, but one of the problems that a lot of customers, business customers have is when they look at energy efficiency, when they look at solar, there's sometimes actually a contradiction between them in terms of assessing the business value. If they have some amount of money they want to invest in, if they do energy efficiency, that might impact the return on investment on solar. Now, and there's a bit of a problem here, and sometimes you can solve it if you say, okay, let's think long term. Yeah, think about the long term and what can you do all the time. But on the planet is, have you seen any way of trying to work around or combine? You mentioned about combining them. Is there a way to try and deal with that?
Yeah, I get okay. Look, I probably showing my age by saying back when cogeneration was in vogue, we had a you remember, Jeff. We had this absurd argument that it was not effective to build an airtight, as you referred to it, before building. It was better if it was leaky because you got we have the same conundrum or stupidity when we're talking about solar, saying, well, put the solar on the roof, but then if you go and put LED lights in, that undermines the solar business case. It's purely a false way of reading a spreadsheet. We have to, there's obviously two things that I think the point Anna makes before is, there's two things that I've sort of been involved in a lot of programs that have been supporting new businesses being able to interface with households and businesses. And there is a very strong reckoning that we need to understand about the solar is because people do like it. So we shouldn't rail against that. We should understand that it was a specific and pluggable thing to do, and it was also quite trendy. The LED lights have also been a digestible thing. It probably helps that there was something in your letterbox that said it was free, and once you actually believed that it was free, then you went and did it. We really have struggled, I think, as a broader industry about actually integrating those things. So I think we've talked about it a lot. I know we've said, yep, there's a business case, we can wrap this up, it can be a one-stop shop. I think the execution of that has been pretty poor. And I think that's something that, you know, is possibly an industry thing that we can actually think about how better to do that. And I think part of it is clearly about communication. There's a lot of mechanisms now around financing. I mentioned EUAs before, and those things are potentially enablers, but they can also, therefore, confuse. They potentially add another layer of confusion in explaining something, and that's why I think we need to sort of oscillate and understand why those simple "I'll just get solar" have in some ways prevailed. The other thing is that I guess it comes back to understanding increasingly where the value is. So when we've talked about solar, it's been about behind the meter because there has been no export value, and similarly for the energy efficiency. And I guess I'm contending that there is some rapid potential shifts, some new startup models, but some ones to watch in the retail space that are actually bringing together potentially that investment case for on-site demand management with a retail combination. So there's companies like, people might be aware of Mojo and those companies that are haven't got a Victorian license yet, but are starting to explore quite an interesting space. And I think that in that space is quite interesting because you then can couple it to a much longer term mechanism through electricity bills and payment.
I think that sort of highlights, I guess, one of the points from all the presenters today is that most of the people in this room are experts in doing energy efficiency work, and I think the new frontier is trying to think beyond the project that we're on, both as an individual company but also as regulators. We need to start going, there was this real old story, if it's one simple message I get people to take away, which is, it's consumers' choice for doing energy efficiency, and the story they're the people who do energy management. The fact that you've got an entire industry sorting out the supply side and basically making it almost zero effort for consumers to look at that side of things, but then they have to do the demand side on their own, is a fundamental failure of not only imagination but basic understanding of how things work. And it's the line I often think of, as Luke's probably heard me say this quite a few times, which is Banksy, who's an artist, says, there's so many artists prepared to suffer for their art, but why so few of them prepared to learn how to draw? And I kind of feel a bit like that about energy regulators. Which is like, if you're going to understand the energy space, maybe understand the energy space would be a good place to start.
Yeah.
Yep. Start.
Yeah, so just related to this point about bridging the gap between energy efficiency and renewable energy, do you think this has to come from industries working together, or can it also be pushed by, for instance, the Energy Efficiency Council working together with the Austrian Solar Council as a symbol of collaboration between these two big bodies to then push their industries to collaborate?
Yes, that's absolutely something we can do, and we do a lot of work with a lot of the other industry bodies behind the scenes, because that's where you generally get stuff done a lot faster. And there's some of that going on at the moment to try and sort of look at some of these issues. But yeah, you can do a whole lot more in that space, and there's a very big role for governments as well to do this. But I mean, I think one of the challenges we've got with the regulatory space in general. This is a big debate you see across a whole range of areas, not just this, which is, we're talking about the need for energy market rules in a way to shift to make this stuff happen less messily. This is going to happen. This is the real thing for me. Is like, this is going to happen, but either it's going to happen at great expense with huge problems like South Australia, or we can do it well. That's really where the choice is. And I was amazed last year when Mike Nahan came out and basically said all new supply, and he's ex-IPA, very conservative politically guy, who said all new supply in WA is going to be solar PV. And his reason was he'd finally come to the conclusion, because I don't have a choice in this. That's what consumers are going to put in, so why on earth would we put anything else in? And I think that's the sort of point we're at. But the debate that I do here to a certain extent is either it's going to happen well or it's going to happen badly. With the energy regulatory system we have in Australia, I have heard a couple of people say maybe it just needs to burn to the ground and we can build something from its ashes, which I don't think is a very positive approach. I'll be quite honest, you probably know who I'm talking about. But it's also possible. I think that's one of the things we're almost going to see happen is small fringe of grid projects doing things really excitingly, because I think getting the whole system to change is almost going to be too hard. And I think, as a point you mentioned, Anna, I think states are going to be increasingly doing all the work in the space because it's so damn hard to get things to happen at a national level, and we're particularly seeing Victoria, I think, in New South Wales and ACT do some really, really innovative things in recent months.
In a way, you can say if you don't do anything, then you might end up like South Australia, where prices are sending a signal to the market that the market forces might come in and try and do something. If they don't work, prices might continue going even higher until somebody understands. Like I say, it doesn't necessarily need to crash down, but people will say their thing.
Yeah, and I think probably blackouts have a bigger impact on price increases as well.
Yep.
My question was, like, you average Joe consumer out there at the moment, is very traditional in the way that they consume power, the way that they get a bill each month or each quarter. My question is, how are we going to nurse those consumers through the disruptive change? Will it be traditional energy companies doing that, or will we actually see new players start to come in the market? Because business models in the your standard energy retail market is very centric around old style ways of generation and passing that through the network and charging to customers. Their workforces are probably very underprepared for the new changes that you described. How are we going to nurse the consumer through these changes?
Can I just jump in very quickly and then drop back to the more interesting question you asked? I actually think consumers are already doing that. And if you just look at some of the basic things, the technologies that people have in their house and how they use electricity has changed so dramatically in the last 5 years. The big one for me is I barely ever have my computer plugged in during the daytime ever anymore. It's a laptop and it charges overnight. Same with my phone. So actually the electronic items that I use the most, biggest energy use in my house is my fridge by a long way. And that's the only thing that churns away all the time. Everything else I carry on me. I don't know. So I think they're already changing. It's almost how can we facilitate that? I don't think it's necessary. This whole idea that I think some of the energy markets view is like prices are going to go up and down and people will go around switching things on and off. I don't think is very realistic.
Do you have a comment on?
I think not just the energy industry is moving to a consumer-centric model. You sit in any industry body function like this, and the conferences will be, have you put the consumer at the centre? There are courses on it, MBA schools on it. It's a trend. Facebook and the like have enabled that. Retailers are, supermarkets are changing, banks are changing. So I think any or all of those other players could be the ones to do what you're suggesting and work it out for themselves and say, right, we finally got good interaction with our consumers through apps and the like. And banks are like energy companies in that they're struggling because they've got old billing systems and they're trying to put new in, and there's fintech companies that are coming in over the top. And then they say, we're talking to this consumer about this other product, we'll give them energy too. And that's highly likely. There are a few regulatory barriers in the way, but likely to be more surmountable than some of the demand-side management ones, to be honest. So I think technology might help accelerate that as well as the general trend toward consumer centricity. And you're right, the current energy players are scrambling to keep pace with that.
I think you're very right. The consumer-centric stuff is the buzzword. And when I was at Melbourne Energy Foundation, we were designing community engagement projects. We'd sit around and we'd get pretty excited, and we'd get, there's this device that you can monitor your energy through your smart meter, and it's a display and all this stuff, and we'll do this and we'll get people to do that and stuff. And a bit like the consumers, it's sort of this assumption that the community or consumers are somewhere over there and like it's us, yeah? So we always used to sit around a team and say, would we do this thing that we're asking the community to do? And I think that the same thing applies. How does a consumer think? Well, how do you think? Would you do this kind of thing? And it's a fairly simple truth that I think we're increasingly exposed to huge amounts of technology. People have become very comfortable with it. Everyone has a smartphone in their pocket. They use it in a much more phenomenal way than they did 2 or 3 years ago. But what it's doing is providing you with something you didn't have. Now, you can argue whether that's an evil thing now or a good thing in terms of distraction and looking at Facebook or whatever it is. But one of the things we sort of contended is that actually we always had electricity, yeah? Tesla's very exciting, it looks really good. If you've got a Tesla car, but the Tesla battery looks nice, but it's in your garage and it's probably over after, depending on how much of an engineer you are, it might be hours or days in terms of its, go and sit and pat it kind of thing. Because it's actually the laptop computer, or it's all about, the whole, one of the other things that coming from the LNP's church was it's all about the end use. What are you actually using it for? What's the benefit for you? How does this actually improve your benefit? And so if it doesn't improve your benefit, then it is actually a bit boring and it is about the cost. And if it's too complicated, then that comes back to how we need to bundle it up to be actually a thing. I guess coming back to that though, increasingly people are more comfortable with a whole series of different commercial offers that are around that. They're used to mobile phone plans, and I think some of the thing I was describing then about these various payments that might happen through electronic systems in the end will be for companies like Mojo and a series of other, and I very much agree that the new retailers are really people who aggregate. Telstra's obviously got a fellow called Ben Birch who set up Power Shop. There's some conjecture about whether they are themselves too old as an entity to be able to shift a business, but there's a lot of conjecture about it'll be a Google or somebody that actually becomes that point for the consumer. But that technology combined with those new business models is actually where you start to get that value.
I think there are technologies that haven't even made to the Australian market or mass. So technologies like the Amazon, I forgot the name, but basically making your house smart in a very easy way. And then all of the management of the sockets can happen almost automatically. You don't need to go and set off and stuff. It just happens. Smart houses.
Yeah, one of the grooviest projects actually on your data map, I think it was your data center point earlier. I don't know if anybody else has read about Google purchased DeepMind. It's like one of the world's top artificial intelligence systems. And one of the first tasks they said it was to lower their data center bill, and they managed to lower their data center bills by 40% optimization because it was too complex to do through human thinking or calculations or any other optimization. So they basically developed an artificial intelligence system to optimize their data centers. That is like the most exciting energy efficiency project I've heard of.
Well, I'm getting signals that the food is ready, so one quick question.
Can I just do some commentary, really? It's a question I threw out to Luke earlier in the week. I'd be interested in your comments on the AMEC ruling that came out over the weekend, or was reported on Sunday, about the City of Sydney brought up this, wanted to have a change to the market rule to basically allow for community schemes to be able to export and so on. Well, you guys know more about what it is. Perhaps you could explain what the scheme was and your thoughts on why AMEC rejected it, and what does that say about the current state of regulation in this country?
Is that something we can do?
That's a longer, yeah.
It's a
We
longer-
can't do that with.
Just your comment on
Jeff, I think
also on why it got rejected.
Jeff, we can continue the discussion outside. It's almost like a full topic. I'd like to thank the speakers for coming. I'd like to thank the Energy Efficiency Council in collaboration with us, and to wish them good luck with the handbook. I'd like to thank the committee members on the AIE and Charles Williams for organising tonight and for everybody supporting here. Aurecon for hosting us for the second time. We're happy to be here. It's an amazing facility. Just a few quick words about the AIE. So as you might know, we try to do an event every month. We still haven't had the next month, but please keep in touch on the LinkedIn and the email list. If you're not there, please do that. We're also planning some plan next year. So if you're an organizational individual that want to be more active, you want to participate in organizing events, or as an organization you want to collaborate with us, feel free to talk to me, Charles, and the committee members that are on here. We'll definitely be happy to hear ideas and explore different opportunities. And I'd like to thank you for coming here, and please go network, eat a bit, and drink. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, good.